I'd like to first welcome all of you to the Stockbridge Library's online poetry series. We are in year number 2, and the theme of this year's series is the refuge of witnessing. So we have had various poets reading for us and discussing the concept of witnessing, particularly poignant during these difficult times. So our series is once again spearheaded by John Gillespie, who is the chair emeritus of the Stockbridge Library Board of Trustees. So John, thank you so much for bringing poetry into all of our lives for the last year and a half. And I'm very happy to welcome back Owen Lewis, who is a local poet here in the Berkshires and a great friend to the library. Owen, so glad you're with us today. A few words about Owen, and then I will turn the program over. Owen is the author of 3 collections of poetry, most recently Field Light, which is set in Glendale, Massachusetts, here in the Berkshires. He's also the author of 2 chapbooks, including Best Man, which was the recipient of the 2016 Jean Pedrick Chapbook Prize. And his other awards and prizes include being a finalist for the 2017 Pablo Neruda Award and first prize in the 2016 International Hippocrates Prize for Poetry. And Owen's poetry can be found in journals such as Nimrod, Poetry Wales, the Mississippi Review, Southward, Stay Thirsty Poets, and Presence. On top of being a very skilled and accomplished poet, Owen is a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, where he teaches narrative medicine in the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics. And Owen will be treating us to a poetry symposium on this theme here in person at the Stockbridge Library on April 9th from 2 to 4 p.m. And that series will discuss the intersection of poetry and mental health. So I'll stop talking so we can get the real program going. Owen, thank you again for joining us. And John, thank you. I'll turn the program over to you.
Yeah, great. Oh, thank you very much, Wendy. And a couple of little notes. I put something in the chat box if you want to be on. I maintain a poetry only mailing list, and we send out a weekly update on our events. If you want to be on that list, you could just send me an email or put your name in the chat box with a note. And then I have a hard stop at 12:55 today because I've got a board meeting at 1 for another organization. So let's just dive in. So, and just to let you know, I have a pre-chat with every poet before we have a session this year, because it's really a lot more than a reading. It's really an ongoing conversation. So Owen, why don't you tell us just where do you find refuge nowadays or recently?
Well, I think the simple answer is 2 miles down the road from the library, the Stockbridge Library. I have a house that has, I've had for almost 30 years, but spent much more time living here. In fact, almost exclusive time living here since the beginning of the pandemic, and have really been able to settle in. I always had a sense of it being there to offer refuge, and it was almost as if after this time I took the house up on the offer. So it's that, and I would say in writing also. I mean, writing is not time is not space dependent, it's time dependent, and creating a certain mental refuge in the writing. I, rely on that time daily to be in, really. Yeah.
So does that daily time, happen at a preordained time, or is it
Oh
more
yeah.
kind of spontaneous that all of a sudden you're
No, 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 no. It's first thing. I tend to be a pretty early riser, so I'm up definitely before 6, often at 5, and depending on my morning, have a few hours, before emails, before text messages, before attending to all the things of the day. I have that time in the morning. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't come back to it later on, but it's pretty much an appointment. And even on a busy day, I'll spend at least an hour first thing. Yeah.
and is that different from maybe a year or two ago in terms of your process?
No, no. Since I returned to writing, which maybe 12, 13 years ago, once I began writing again, that became a daily practice. And like any practice, the more you do it, the more it's there for you, um, to receive you. So no, that hasn't changed.
So I think poetry informs the creator. What of your poems, I mean, that's one view. What of your poems kind of told you? I feel like the written word comes back at you, and does that make sense?
Well, yeah, there's sort of writing and then reflecting on your writing and sort of using the writing to propel you through the writing.
Yeah.
So yeah, things occur, and sort of in my prior book, which was also about refuge, but in a different sense. And sort of the refuge became finding oneself in history and connecting to history. I mean, refuge is about other people, whether they're immediate or further away, and then also to what's gone on beforehand. So, um, in my previous book, I wasn't expecting necessarily to write about the history of the Berkshires, but there it was. Pieces of it kept coming at me and asking, what's my relationship to this piece of history, and what do I find in it, and what does that piece of history say to me?
Yeah, and I know when for everybody here, I used to live in Stockbridge, so I went by Owen's house before his first talk, and I don't know if it's on the book, but there was a famous picture of people on the porch where you
Right.
at your house. Who were those people?
So the back porch, the this house that I'm in was renovated and given to Daniel Chester French's daughter on her wedding, when she was some point in her 20s. And so on the porch are his daughter, her husband, um, the uh, a relative by marriage of, I think, the granddaughter-in-law of Harriet Beecher Stowe. The Beecher Stowes, um, direct relatives from Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, live right down the road. And woman's sister, who was the founder of Tanglewood. And so that book begins with musing about who these people were who sat, on my porch, or I sat on their porch 100 years ago, and who are they to me? Who am I to them? Well, I mean, I'm nothing to them, but imagining certain continuities and that place in history. Yeah.
So are there some poems you could share about that?
Um,
Or other poems you picked out? Don't feel like
yeah,
I'm.
no, no, there are other poems I picked out, and one of the reasons the the topic that you have suggested, not only witnessing but witnessing and refuge, um, struck me as um, really quite interesting polarities that are really connected. Like what makes for refuge, what makes for witnessing, and during the first year of the pandemic, when we were all taking refuge from something, I had the rather unusual, or maybe it's not so unusual for the pandemic, but our younger daughter moved in with us up here with a 1 month old. So while the pandemic was raging and witnessing what was going on around with the pandemic, um, here I was in a position to witness on a daily basis the development of this child, and that juxtaposition seemed like both such a gift and so ironic that in some ways in the midst and those first months, I'm sure we can all recall, were really quite devastating. I mean, that was when we were washing down groceries and really keeping social distance, and it was both a terrible time, the best of times and the worst of times. It was on another level the best of times in that here was this child that I could witness and have a hand in raising. Now, and that actually has become the subject of my new book, which I don't want to say it's finished. It's laid out. I have most of the poems that are going to be going into it, and I'm fine tuning it now. And the granddaughter's name is Noah. Sounds like the boy's name Noah, but in Hebrew it's a different word, Noa. And the tentative title is called The Books of Noah. And so this was a constant inquiry on both witnessing and finding refuge and the interconnection. John, on some of the programs, I've heard such interesting discussions about how to witness in and of itself provides a certain refuge, and what is the nature of a refuge if it's not in relation to something outside of itself. So, I began to think that in some ways what we witness is time bound, and what offers refuge is in some ways out of time. So I thought I would read a few poems from the new manuscript, which I think illustrate more pointedly the the contrast between those things. So a poem that I'm going to start with, let me pull it up here. A poem called First Inoculation. And if you recall, so this would have been April 2020. Vaccines were a distant hope, and the world was really in mayhem. it was April that year. There were three like crazy snowstorms. I mean, spring snow melts fast, but it was just, there were three storms. And the day that my granddaughter was supposed to get her first inoculation was the midst of one of these storms. And so I'm going to read this poem called First Inoculation, which is about just that. So let me read that, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about it. First inoculation. In a dense spring snow we set out, the baby sleeping, my daughter silent, directions robotic, precise, the flakes as large as leaves splatter and thud. In the parking lot of a closed school, a silver Airstream mobile, health services in bright blue on the side. This is health in this time of this virus. I wait in the car. There's no music. The droning of self-replicating news, colleagues conscripted to the city's front lines inserting IVs and intubation tubes. I'm consigned to wait while the baby gets an injection in her thigh. And another, 7 disease relics, scourges few young doctors have heard, whooping cough, frightened children, rigid spasms in steam tents, the tents of a tight cough, tetanus or death or poliomyelitis. I remember the summer. I couldn't swim, pools and ponds closed, edict of the county health commissioner, and we trusted government decisions. The faith in, though I didn't know it then, a recent president encumbered by canes and braces, defeating stronger leg tyrants who warred to cleanse the viral races. I did know then, my mother's pale worry, Life magazine's iron lung, photos taken away from me, the crippled children who couldn't run on crutches or on legs, as flimsy thin as the summer wax beans we washed and wash again and again, the windshield so thick with whatever this snow is. Trees should be green, this blizzard fear is blizzarding. I will get them home. The loud radio channels cross the sonic barrier, the radio channeling the static sounds of sound waves struggling, the rushed inspiration, hushed expiration, forced ventilation pushing virus-swollen airways, pathways to the hospital's yellow quadrantine tapes of danger of what and how and when. Dear child, dear children, can we inoculate against this flurry, this fake news of epidemiology's failing, this new dark age of disease, the new lockjaw on truth? I can't see through this out-of-season storm, this knocking, this thudding. I hear, yes, I hear this crying. Turn the key on. Just turn the key. The key. Her crying is the key. She cries, and I hear the safety of the safety belts click. Her mother says, all good, all good. I repeat to myself, all good, all good.
Quite a ride.
So it's a bit of a longer poem, but you know, in terms of what was being witnessed and where's the refuge here, well, I mean, this whole notion of an inoculation at a time, when there was this bigger disease looming that threatened to take us all down, and all these inoculations that the baby was getting for diseases that I can tell you no young doctor has ever seen. No young doctor has seen whooping, well, maybe a little whooping cough, but certainly not polio. They rarely see tetanus. And certainly from the point of view of polio, I have this very distant memory of a summer, which I recall here. And then this whole notion of this storm, and the storm is not just the virus, but the political situation that we were facing. And then recalling FDR and, what we were facing then during these scourges of polio. And so where is the refuge here? Well, I think there were two things. One is trying to put the present time in the context of history, a larger history, which did offer some salvation, that there was a time when people were dying of all these other diseases. And here, as we're facing dying, maybe the vaccination will come along, and sure enough, it has. But then there's also the refuge in a new life, and however that new life is going to be launched.
Yeah, nice. No, I remember being in junior high in Newton, Mass, and lining up to get the polio vaccine.
Right.
There was no, I don't remember anyone voting out of getting it. It was just like, this classroom's going to go, then this classroom's going to go. It's such a different time.
Right. And I'm sure I'm dating myself by having this very early memory of probably the last epidemic of polio, when we just couldn't swim for that summer. We couldn't, it wasn't a lockdown like we experienced during COVID, but we weren't going into public places that summer. I mean, I was 4, maybe very early memory. And then the contrast, when the government said something, then my sense was we all just did it. There was no questioning, second guessing. And what is it like to have faith in a government, as opposed to all the rancor around the rules and regulations and the questioning that we're still in, by the way. Yeah.
So Anna said in the chat that the car with your family was also a refuge.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Come to think of it, it was, but it was a capsule, and it was a refuge, but isolating, and I think refuge comes at the price of isolation, right? And that's the tension. What are we witnessing,
So is there another poem you'd like to read for us right now?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple I'd like to read. Part of the pleasure or the refuge was witnessing a child's development, right? And so noting the development, that was also part of witnessing. And so this poem, it's a smaller poem. It's called Hand, and is sort of witnessing a child discovering her own hand. I have to say I was probably influenced, as I look at it now, by E. Cummings and his wonderful poem, Spring is Like a Perhaps Hand. So I think that may have been in the background. But this is called Hand, and this is in the voice of an infant who obviously can't speak. Hand, 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 I move it. It moves towards, away, it goes back and comes back. I make it move. There are two of them. They clasp, reach, can clasp, can reach, can touch. I can put them in my mouth. My mouth tastes what hand is. And they have fingers, many. It's kind of a capricious little poem, but I hope it in some ways captures sort of the magic of a
Yeah.
child. Um,
Hey, Owen, I want to read some stuff from the chat. So
Please.
Keith Curtis said, struck by the reference to Lockjaw. The poem leaves us hanging. I guess this is, Keith, you're talking about the inoculation. He says, where does Owen see, or has he written of the answer to the question of our time? Now, Keith, maybe you want to unmute and clarify that for us.
Yeah, I felt it was wonderful and powerful, and I was struck by the lockjaw one because I just remember always as a kid, did you get your tetanus shot? Going out there and you're running out in the wild. There was always barbed wire around, or nails, or things like that, or rusty nails, and surely everybody, must have gotten their tetanus shot. I mean, everybody got TPT, everybody got that, and without a second thought. And just, I know that the power is as much in the question as in the answer, but I just wonder if you've written about, that all that where did all this come from, and why has it changed, and why are we different that way? And yeah, are we just going through something, or is there something profoundly different?
um, I haven't. I mean, I haven't taken that subject up, at least in this new book. What's different? I mean, we all have ideas. I mean, I think, um, we're in a period of profound social unrest, and I mean, we can all speculate what that means, but there's far less sense of the common good, or everyone has an individual notion of what that common good is. So one person's common good is not the next, whereas, you know, at an earlier time in history, there could be more of a consensus about what that common good is. Um, you mentioned lockjaw. I think, that notion was so terrifying as a child. Can you remember that lockjaw? Could you imagine your jaw locks and you can't speak? But I thought that is what this is about. This is, politically we're in lockjaw. Politically we're at a point where there isn't free speech. Republicans and Democrats don't speak to each other. Congress has lost the ability to know how to converse with one another. So, yeah, I don't have an answer, but it's a wonderful question.
So, let's just talk a little bit more about witnessing.
Mhm.
How does witnessing, how does that play a part in your life? And then maybe you could, if there were some poems that you wanted to read around that.
Sure. Well, I think, as I was saying earlier, I mean, it's a natural human tendency to seek comfort and to seek refuge and to seek a place that is immune um, from the incursions of the world. But as Anne Marie pointed out, the car was a refuge, yes, but the car is a capsule. It was just in this snowy, abandoned parking lot. And what kind of refuge can you have if it's disconnected from the rest of the world? So I think there's an obligation to witness and record and to both see ourselves dynamically in time. And you know, the themes in this book are witnessing what's going on in society at large and witnessing what's going on up close, namely in terms of this infant's development and how that is a kind of a progressive thing. You know, it's I mean, we're not disconnected from our time, you know, and not to try to notice. And I mean, I think it's our obligation to try and notice and focus and be in our time as much as it is a tendency to wish to escape from our time.
So let me ask you this. Do you think, witnessing is, is it active? Do people seek to do it? Or do you think it's just, you're kind of thrown into circumstances where you have to engage witnessing. There's no other choice.
Well, sometimes there is a choice. I mean, we could all, put blindfolders on and try not to see what's going on. So, one, I think there is a choice, but the real witnessing to me is thinking about what one has witnessed. Where does the event live in the imagination? What context is there for it? And in fact, to bring events to life, poets will very typically bring their full imagination to imagining the full impact of an event. So in that sense, also, I think witnessing is not only what kind of goes across your eyes, but what your mind does with it and how your mind attempts to bring it to life in its entirety. And I think that's what poets do in their witnessing.
So Victoria asked the question, how does one witness and maintain the lyric moment, the lyric point of view, considering Louise Gluck's Nobel Prize speech?
Well, I think that's the art of poetry. I mean, I think by focusing on the emotional impact and impacts of what is witnessed. I mean, what drives the lyric, in my mind, is emotion. So it's not just the facts, but bringing those facts imaginatively to life and letting the essential emotional content of those facts drive the lines, drive the telling. I mean, I think that's where the lyric resides.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any questions? I At times we leave it to the end, but I want, if you want to unmute and ask any questions, I want to make sure we have time to do that. No, not hearing any. So, why don't you, the classic I like, the one with the railroad crossing. That's one of my favorite Owen Lewis poems. Just because it's Stockbridge geography, but you don't have to read it. But I love that poem.
I unmuted.
Um,
You did? Yeah.
I'd have.
Owen, this is Kanti.
Hello, Kanti.
I have a question and a comment. I listened to the first inoculation and your subsequent commentary and preceding the recitation of the poem itself. And my mind raised a question that your description will be witnessed, hopefully, 15 or 20 years from now, when little Noah, she grows up in being a student and reading and questioning. I think that if she just read the poem itself, it may not convey to her what the impact of the then at that time, the snow falling, the weather, COVID surging and changing the physical and emotional behavior of the world around her. I feel that a poem, as any piece of art, is usually a standalone on itself. But Noah may not be able to witness the word we are concentrating on. The entire dynamic
Well,
of
that's easy.
first inoculation.
Kanti, let
So
me.
is it possible for us in 2022 to record and preserve this description of yours and explanation in
Well-
order to make it more accessible to Noahs who are present as Noah, but may not appreciate what
Well,
the grandfather meant
Thank you,
by this.
Kanti. Thank you for that comment. I think I would take exception to the idea that a poem is yes, I agree that a poem needs to stand alone, but a poem also exists in the context of a book. And the context, when you see, let's say, the show of an artist, the paintings around it contribute to a larger meaning. Robert Frost said, I forget the number, but in a book of 32 poems, the book itself is the 33rd poem. So hopefully this new manuscript gives some of that context to being able to provide just what was this time that she was born into and what were the preoccupations of the people around her at that time. So, but I think that takes a whole book, and that can't be just in one poem.
All right. So more poems to read for us, Owen?
Sure. I mean, here I'm going to read another poem, which I think again is both poised between witnessing and finding refuge. It's called, again, it's a little bit of a longer poem. I ask you to sort of bear with this. It's called Rough Road, May, Birthday with Granddaughter. So the setting of this poem, what I'm really trying to witness is the social behaviors of how people acted in public at the time. And sort of this, even when you were out in public, there being this private space. So in this poem, I'm wheeling my granddaughter in a carriage on the rough road that is my house. My house is set on. Rough road, May, birthday with granddaughter. I set out, walking the late afternoon, watching myself push the carriage along the rough road, Williamsville Road, to the Dugway. Not a happy birthday, neighbor, without a what a cute girl. How old is what is happy? Distancing, and I'm distanced from myself, watching distant waves, all wanting these hours of leafing trees, want to come closer. I veer away, they step aside, curb curiosity, don't peek under the carriage hood, afraid of this modern pox. Paths weaving, wavering, which way forward, which back, even friends of many years, even the shadows are confused, milling about, coalesce into dusty veils of evening air, forget celebration. Local news, death toll, the same number, my 69 years and the child's 1 year, and my mother's life calendar, 1 year left and right. The neighbors give us wide passage in the country road. It thins in the distance. I squint to see further. The two of us, hours, days, or years ahead. At the far curve, the road bends past the granite outcropping. The future extends, receives her beyond the folds of calendar leaves. And what glimpsed anticipation, what suddenly cawing thing talks, blares with news? What news? In the air, alarms, sirens strike. The sudden crow squadron wings a treetop. Troops could be gathering anywhere, beating towards a darker hill, breaking sound, the barrier opening between now, the future of now, future's long flight without trace into the contrail of cloud, tense, timeless, this child. What future will she have? And I feel my grip on the handle clench, fingers, biceps, thighs, back. The carriage pulls me forward along the road's westward decline. At the curve where the earth-old stone glints in mica's brighter sunset gold, a rent of silver glows, and there I leave my blessing. May she find her way. And my grip on the handle clench releases. She sings with the canter click of the wheels, my trotting footfall as I hum along in a graveled voice. Our moment of duet fades over the road's pale meridians, and she sings with the late songbirds, a century-old chorus, a chanted accolade. The sounds of light cover her like a comforter. In the long evenings, embrace of shadowed arms, her sleep, and the pace of a grandfather's footed keep. The air crowds with the scent of wild phlox. So, this is trying to encapsulate what it's like to be in public,
Yeah.
in the odd time, and to sort of, how neighbors had to keep away from each other, and yet here I am with this child progressing into the future, and what will that future be? So
Yeah, you got some very nice comments. Ellen Steinbaum had a leave said, when we read any work written in another time, we need to learn or be open to receiving the observations of a different moment. It connects us and will connect Noah to a moment she will not be in, but will then have a window into. And, she said, thank you for the reading. And you've gotten, lovely, beautiful, magical. Everyone was really very enthusiastic about the last poem. Yeah.
thank you, everyone. Again, to the theme, though, what's being witnessed and where is refuge? I mean, in here, refuge ultimately is in some sense of the future, but the future in nature. But earlier in the poem, if you remember how tense everything was, crows could turn into a squadron of fighters. It felt that tense. So, there is the refuge in nature, the refuge in the future, and witnessing social behaviors at the time.
Nice. Nice. Any other poems you want to share?
Well, sure. Maybe I'll conclude with two poems in two different seasons. And here we're going to move much more into the refuge,
Yep.
away from the witnessing. And let me just pull this up. Okay. Now, everybody from the area here knows Bartlett's Orchard and West Stockbridge heading towards Richmond, and the pleasure of picking apples in the fall. In this poem, which is called At Bartlett's Orchard, Pick Your Own, my granddaughter's, already on her feet, very much little girl here. And so this is more about refuge and activity in the refuge. At Bartlett's Orchard, pick your own. The white-haired matron in the roadside hut rattles two bags. You pickin'? Bushel or peck? Noah turns away, clings. I try. I love you, a bushel and a... Her parents join the song, and she hazards a peek. The matron's gaze distant. No emotions her. Hug around the neck? No. She takes me by hand, dragging the bag into the paths of weighted apple trees, fruit unreal like decoration. How many harvests allowed? This her first. The fields guarded by a bracelet of bronze hills. They choose and pick and taste the Ida Reds, move on. She cuts the row, impatient to know, leads forward, the McCowans, taking in the names, the Cortlands, the scents, the illuminations of the golden delicious. Sometimes I select, or up the ladder of my back she reaches, higher than I can see. All the trees today are trees of knowledge. Yad Elohim, God's hand everywhere, directing the snake to keep away. All is temptation, thus beyond it. The slanted afternoon burnishes my eyes dim. I know the deer have begun their descent on distant hills. They'll gather at dusk, graze at the chalice of the ground's cider tithe, a tinge of cold. I feel a wintering near. A veil has dropped, invisibly, only felt like a single strand on a basement cobweb across the brow. Lagging half a step, behind the prints of my feet stamped in the damp, parting clumps of earth, I look behind, her parents trail. They've waved. Where is the child? Shosh? That's her chastising name for me. The voice echoes among the trees. It's not another apple she needs. She wants to keep me lockstep with myself.
Wow, fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, really nice, really nice.
The refuge of the Berkshires.
Yeah, I miss part of that, even though I'm in Maine. Maine has its own refuge, but the Berkshires is very special. So very nice, very nice. So we have about 2 minutes left. If anyone had a final question or comment, you don't have to. As I said, I have to get off for a board meeting at 12:55. So, but Owen, this has been fantastic. I think it's a privilege to have you be on our program. I think it's I call it a triple X privilege to have a Stockbridge resident on our program. So I always think it's really, really special. So, thank you for all the thought and work you put into this, because I know we talked, it must have been a month ago or so.
Yeah.
So I know you're
The
I
book-
know the wheels are turning.
Yeah. The book is still emerging. There's just one quick comment. Victoria asked, is the whole book in the present tense? A lot of it is. I don't think. I have to go back and look at it. I sometimes write in past tense, but then convert things into present tense, which I think is a more active place to be, unless it's actually reminiscent. So there is some past tense, but there's an emphasis on the present tense in this. Yeah. Hi there, Myra. And Michael, thank you, and Susan and Conti. Thank everyone so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
Good job, Owen. Good to see you.
and I have to say, it's really wonderful to try out new poems and to hear them, as things are sort of coalescing into the book. So this was really very helpful to me, and thank you all for your wonderful comments.
Owen, thank you so much on behalf of the library. We're just always delighted to hear your work. So thank you.
Great.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. And
Thank you,
Owen, I'll
everyone.
send you a copy of this recording
Yeah.
when it's ready.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Yep. You got it. Bye.
Bye.